Strength in Leos.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Strength in Leos podcast. I'm your host, Evan Woldridge, and I'm excited to bring you guys another episode that hopefully you guys will enjoy. So we're here already on episode 4 of this season, and today I am joined by Dylan. Dylan runs his own gecko breeding operation, DAB Exotics, and then also runs and is a show promoter for the Scaled Up Expos here in Wisconsin. So whenever I'm at a show here in the Midwest, it's always nice to see Dylan, and he has his booth set up, and that's what this episode kind of felt like. It felt like just us having a awesome conversation, one that we'd have at a show, and just an awesome conversation where we just caught up, talked geckos, and obviously just to get you guys more familiar with Dylan and who he is. So I'll stop talking here and let's just get into the episode. Before we go on, I want to say thank you to our sponsors. Impeccable Gecko is a small to mid-sized family-operated hobbyist breeder operation. They specialize in leopard geckos with high-quality genetics. Their goal is to provide customers with the absolute best animals that they could produce, coupled with honest and transparent business methods. At Impeccable Gecko, integrity and animal welfare are above all else. Impeccable Gecko is a strong supporter of the Strength in Leos podcast, so follow them on social media and check out what they have available. John of Gecko Boa started early, like most of us, catching lizards and snakes in his backyard at any chance he got. Over the years, he has kept and bred more than 80 species of reptiles. In recent years, his focus has turned to specializing within the genus Eublepharus. He has worked hard to pioneer some of the most cutting-edge leopard geckos while maintaining genetic purity and honesty. He also keeps the most diverse collection of pure Eublepharus species in the world. He has coordinated with biologists around the world and has contributed DNA sampling and distribution range info to help sort out the cladistic relationships within the genus. Check out geckoboa.com for more info and available geckos. Suburban Geckos is operated by Chris Charlton. Chris's passion and enjoyment for herpetoculture, and more specifically, leopard geckos, drove the desire to take his hobby to the next level. With experience in breeding and raising reptiles well over 20 years, Chris is dedicated to producing quality animals for both the hobbyist and breeder alike. Suburban Geckos treats each animal with the utmost care and respect, and cuts no corners when it comes to health and integrity of their geckos. What started off as just a couple aquariums has grown into quite the collection in just a few years, and they wouldn't have it any other way. The dedication to their animals is unparalleled and evident in the quality and health of their animals that they produce. Exemplary customer service is another area where they excel. They're readily available to answer any questions you may have regarding their animals, husbandry, and etc. For more info and to see their availability, check out suburbangeckos.com. Blizzy Bold Leos, while new to the scene, is taking strides in following the footsteps of top-tier breeders and keepers in care and ethics while aspiring to bring fresh looks and crosses to explore latent potential. Prior to becoming a breeder, Greg of Blizzy Bold Leos completed hours of extensive research on lines, ethics, morphs, and how certain traits interact with others in order to begin projects which are coming to fruition already in the second season of breeding. With a major focus on line breeding the correct way and customer service done right, Blizzy Bold Leos aspires to be a breath of fresh air to the customers and keepers they encounter. Be sure to check out their Instagram, Blizzy Bold Leos, and stay up to date on project development, availability, or just tips on having healthy animals in your care. DAB Exotics is a hobbyist breeding operation that was started in 2017. They specialize in producing healthy leopard geckos from top quality genetics. DAB Exotics is an awesome supporter of the Strength in Leos podcast, so follow them on social media and check out what they have available for sale. Shane Kelly is a blue-collar, working-class guy that has a reptile breeding business with his wife and kids. They are currently working with high-quality ball python morphs, western hognose snakes, and select leopard geckos with a focus on bold stripes, and they're looking forward to adding Albey Snow and Ghost this year. They have been listening to the podcast since the beginning and are proud to be a Season 4 sponsor. Go check out their social media, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and also check out their morph market to see what they have available. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Strength in Leos podcast. Another awesome guest with us today. We have Dylan on from the podcast. Dylan's from DAB Exotics. So, Dylan, this is your first time, so welcome onto the podcast.
How's it going, Evan? I'm excited to be here for sure. I've been listening pretty much since the beginning, so it's cool to actually finally, get my spot to be on.
Right, exactly. It's your time to shine to be on the podcast. Yeah, no pressure there. Just kidding.
Yeah, right.
No, but yeah, you're an awesome breeder. Here we're in the same state now, which is super awesome. So great to see you at shows and stuff. And yeah, just seeing exactly what you're producing, and glad to finally have you on the podcast. So for anybody who's not familiar with like who you are and your whole breeding situation, and even the shows that you're doing, which is super awesome, can you just give us a little bit of background about who you are and your company name and everything like that?
Yeah, so my name's Dylan. I'm with DAB Exotics. DAB Exotics, DAB. It's Dylan and Brittany. Brittany's my girlfriend. We started breeding in 2017, started breeding leopard geckos. And then recently we've expanded into African fat tails and Western hognose as well. And then we also run a reptile expo up here in Wisconsin called Scaled Up Expos. We've been doing that since 2019. That's been fun as well. But yeah, we work with Albey Snow, Skittles, and then your more basic stuff, Max Snow, Tramper Eclipse, stuff like that. And we recently got into Bell Albino as well, which is exciting.
Yeah, you definitely have a lot of stuff going on over there, and cool stuff too. Not basic stuff, which is super awesome to see you get into.
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm probably most excited for the Albey Snow stuff. The Albey Snow and the Albey Linebred Snow is pretty exciting
It's the
stuff
way to
as far
go.
as yeah, exactly. As far as I've told a couple people this, we've hatched many Max Snows out. I've never worked with Gem or Tug, but Albey Snow is when it hatches is so much whiter than Max Snow. I don't know if you've seen
Yeah.
it,
Oh
but it's
yeah.
hard to even tell in pictures. But Albey Snow is, in my opinion, I might be a little biased, far superior than the other snows. But not that there's anything wrong with them. It's just I'm a little biased.
Yeah. I am too, but we're not gonna have the bias hold us back for
Yeah,
for how
right,
awesome
right.
they are. Yeah, and that's one thing that I'm not even working with the line bred side of it. You're working with the line bred side of the Albie Snow, and I know we've talked about explaining how that works, and we know how it works because we're both into it. But from explaining to someone who might not know about the Albie Snow or even knows about it but thinks it's like a line bred thing. So for you, when you talk about the Albie Snow and how do you explain that to people and explaining the difference between the line bred snow and then the dominant version of that snow?
Well, my first go-to is I always send a link to Miles's write-up on it because
Yeah,
that explains it perfectly. And if anybody doesn't know how to get it or whatever, shoot me a message, shoot you a message. We'll send you the link because that really explains it perfectly. But like at shows, if I'm explaining it, basically how we go about it is Albie Snow is a dominant snow. So that's pretty self-explanatory. But where it
right,
gets confusing is there's also Albie linebred snow or Albie LBS is what we would label it as, and that is a non-dominant version of a white gecko of snow. And basically, way back in the day, Albie Snow was thought to be line bred, but what we've come to find out is there is a dominant snow hidden in there somewhere. So when you separate them, you get the line bred form, and then you also get the dominant form, which obviously can also be line bred.
right. Yeah. So even though it's interesting, even kind of seeing how I got started with Albies and how you got started with Albies is slightly different because you had an 100% female, and my Albies, most of it is all of it is a dominant form, but it came from an Albie Snow Ghost. So that Albie Snow Ghost was 50% of that line bred snow, and then each generation that's removed is less and less.
Yeah, so I got 100% from the original line, female from Miles, and basically, so what we've been doing with that is bringing it to like outcrossing it to subspecies and stuff. We got Turkmenicus in it so far. We tried Fascio, that didn't work out this year, but basically our goal is to put as much genetic diversity into it as possible, and then also work back towards getting the line bred side as close to 100% as we can. So that's kind of my goal with it. But on the dominant, the Albey Snows side of things, I mean, possibilities are really endless. I know you're
Right.
working towards some albino stuff, bold stripe stuff. I mean, really patternless stuff. I mean, you could really do anything with it. It's kind of a blank slate right now. So that's kind of what I'm really excited about on that front, is just seeing what we can do with basically a blank slate of a snow leopard gecko.
Right. Not just like it's a dominant snow, so you won't get supers. And in my opinion, I feel like because it hasn't been worked with and put into so many other things, it's just so pure in terms of like how white it is and that crisp white that you were talking about earlier at hatch, and also how much it's been able to hold that into adulthood with a lot of my stuff, even though I don't have a pure one like you do. Yours have been amazing from what I've seen, the outcrosses and the hatchlings that you've hatched out so far.
Yeah, it is. It is pretty crazy to watch the difference between, like, when they hatch, you can for sure tell the difference between the dominant and then the non-dominant line bred
Right.
side. But then with watching them grow, we've grown up two females and two males from last year, and they from the dominant to the line bred, their pattern's different. And obviously, for leopard geckos, it's not too big of a sample size, but it's something I'm going to be interested in seeing moving forward too, because their pattern is definitely different. The It's hard to explain, but the dominant form seems to have a little bit more of a busier pattern, whereas the line bred seems to have more of just like a normal, wild type leopard gecko pattern, just on a white base. It's kind of how I
Right.
would explain it.
Okay, cool.
So yeah,
Yeah, and it's nice to see those small things, I think, when you're like one of the first to get into something, or like when not too many people are working with something, you could really take your time and really understanding how it reacts with certain things, and even just seeing something hatch to like where it is as an adult. I feel like that's so cool when you're working with something like Albie, and that's probably the
yeah.
best part for me. That's the most rewarding.
For sure, for sure. And watch, yeah, it's like every time you open the tub, it looks like a different gecko almost. And obviously, leopard gecko hatchlings do that in general, but just watching the Albie stuff grow up has been really, really cool. And I think this year we're finally at the point where we have a nice little group of the Turk crosses. We'll probably be letting one or two of those go. And
Nice.
then looking forward to do, Fascio, and Gary has some pure macularis. I want to probably cross into it.
Nice.
Montanus, get as much
Right.
different outcrosses as we can into it before we start diving deep into, getting it back closer to the 100% as far as the
Right.
line bred stuff goes.
Yeah, and that's what's also super cool about the direction you're going with putting it into wild type blood. Even just like the cross that you've been making, it's like crazy to see how that would change. And you have the Turk crosses, but like how different would that look from the Fascio crosses and the pures? Like it's so much to do with it, and it's so cool that you're taking that direction on it and seeing like how to add all these wild type bloods, and then also taking it back to make sure that you're getting the purest white form and then as much line bred of that snow into it.
Well, and that's the thing. Like when you talk about my excitement for Albie Snow, like I'm getting this excited over just wild type crosses, and then like
Right.
you know what I'm saying, and that's like
Yeah,
basic as far as what we can do with it. I mean, really,
exactly.
the possibilities are endless, and I got 3 or 4 years of a plan just for wild type crosses, and then obviously like we tried pairing a bold stripe to one of our dominant females, and stuff like that, so we're going to be working towards that too, but
Nice.
the keeping it, um, you can't say pure because it'll never be 100%
Right.
from the line again. I don't think. I mean, not at least not ethically, right? But
Yeah.
keeping it as pure as possible moving forward to kind of preserve what the original goal of the line was, right? That's kind of what's really important to me as far as working with the LB stuff.
Yeah, and not getting too far into one side where you're just crossing it into other things, and then all of a sudden there's no pure albies out there, which we've seen with tons of the other dominant snow lines or just other things in general, where you can't go backwards because you've gone so far one way.
Exactly, exactly. And like to some people it might not be that super important, but to others it is. And and especially with the Albey
For the
stuff, to
serious
me,
nerds
that's
out
just,
there.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. It might be a little nerdy, but it's kind of what keeps me super, super excited about going and seeing what's hatching and stuff is just, there's more like a responsibility to it, right? And
Hmm.
not trying to paint myself in too noble of a light, but I do enjoy the responsibility and you know it's kind of up to me on where we go with it, but I want to make sure it's, if you ask anybody, they'd say, yeah, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah, right. And even the conversations we've had at like shows and stuff, I totally see just like how passionate you are just about the Albies and obviously all your other leopard geckos too. But with this project specifically, like we've seen how stuff has gotten lost over the years and how even the Albies was almost lost, and super grateful for Miles for getting that and being able to bring that back to life. But even just his passion for this like weird snow that people almost forgot about and were super confused about how it worked, to like where it's getting to now, where we're just at the beginning stages of like what is possible with these in the future, and not many people have them, and super excited to kind of be on the forefront of that and having that passion and spreading that passion to other people to get them excited about Albies.
Well, exactly, and there's a decent little group of people that have Albey Snow that have acquired it from Miles, and it's fun seeing where everybody else is taking it too, right? Like,
Yeah.
not only am I excited about what I'm doing with it, but like I know you're hatching some cool stuff this year with the Albey stuff, and Greg from Blizzy Bold, and there's a
Right.
couple others out there that are hatching some really nice stuff that we're not going for, but it's also something that I can definitely appreciate and get excited about, which is fun as well. That you can sit back and kind of see what everybody else is doing, and we're all enjoying it.
Yeah. And that's something that's also super cool. It's not like I'm in competition with you or I'm in competition with Miles trying to overthrow him with
Yeah, right.
what he's done with it. It's not like that at all.
Yeah,
It's crazy because we'll be at shows and we'll all be in like the same row, just like talking and having fun and stuff like that. It's not like that at all, but we're just having so much fun, like seeing how we could take things in different directions, and we could be working with the same stuff, but be on our different roads, if you will, with where we're
yeah,
taking
yeah.
things.
We all put our own little twist to things. That we all think differently. We all go about things differently, and it's kind of the spice of life. That's what makes stuff interesting and keep stuff moving forward.
Exactly, exactly. I know you recently picked up some bell stuff from Miles, so that should be super exciting. That what was it, like a radar and a white and yellow bell you picked up from him?
Yeah, so anybody who's familiar with Miles and stalks his Morph Market page like I do, there was that radar female that had a really super high white face, pied,
Hmm.
if you will, and the super high white feet and legs. So I picked up that female because I think that's kind of a pretty cool thing. The really high white face and stuff. So we're gonna try to reproduce that and see what we can do with that. And the male we got from him was a white and yellow Max Snow bold stripe bell head eclipse. If I got that
Man.
right, I think. But yeah, just a gorgeous, gorgeous male. Super orange and yellow and white on him. So yeah, that's the radar female's boyfriend, and we've seen a couple pairings. We've got no eggs from her this year, so I don't think they're going to go this year. But for
Okay.
sure next year, we'll have her, and we're looking at picking up a couple more bells from Miles. So kind
Nice.
of jumping in with both feet on the bell side of things.
Right, exactly. Because I know you were working with a lot of Trimper stuff beforehand and had that side going, but getting into the bells, that's like a totally different, not totally different. Obviously, they're both albinos, but just getting into both sides to see like what you do on the Trimper side and the bell side will be super exciting to see in the next few years.
Yeah, like I know like there's a decent number of breeders that like they don't like to work with multiple albinos, or they don't like to work with multiple IGs, or etc. And like for us, it was more or less we started with Tremper, and we only had so much space to keep adding stuff and growing,
Right.
and now we're kind of to the point where it's like we want to expand a little bit more. And after it was like 3 or 4 weeks, I saw this gecko on Miles' Morph Market. I kept looking at it, kept looking at it, and it's like, yeah, I think that's the way we got to go. So that's kind of what decided it for us. It was either bell or rainwater, right? But I
Right.
just couldn't go wrong with what Miles had to offer. So
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what's also cool about like even a lot of the Trimper stuff, and even if you want to compare like Trimper to Bell or Bell to Rainwater, like just the way people take different things, it's kind of the same thing we were talking about before. Like people will have the same morph, same base morph, but just seeing what direction people are taking it in, and seeing how people put their spins on different things is super cool to see, and cool to see like what you'll do with it too as well. I think that'll be really awesome to see where you take that, especially on the experience that you've had with working with other stuff.
Yeah, I'm also really excited because this is the first white and yellow that will be that we have in our collection as well. So
Oh, really?
we've never white and yellow is one of those things where I don't know if I don't want to say intimidated me, but it
Hmm.
was just something. When we first started, I didn't want to add it into the collection just because I wanted to make sure I had all the basics down pat, right? And
Right.
white and yellow. Uh, I guess kind of what stuck out in my head is how many geckos I saw when I first looked into white and yellow, labeled as possible white and yellow, right?
Right.
So when I was first getting into the swing of things, it's like, oh, I want to stay away from that. Now I realize, like, well, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like, at least you're
Right.
being transparent with your genetics. So, and then once I decided, like, yeah, I wouldn't mind having white and yellow. It was just a matter of finding the right one, and so we did, and I'm excited to kind of start learning. Learn for me.
Right.
That's the only way to learn is by doing it. So kind of
Exactly.
start learning what white and yellow is and how white and yellow reacts with stuff. And from what I've heard, white and yellow and bell they go hand in hand. So um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm excited. I'm really excited to see what we'll be producing with that.
Yeah, I remember when I first got into white and yellow and I was like just IDing stuff. I was so scared. Like out of my mind to start IDing stuff. And even like thinking back to like the ghost, I'm like, okay, I got this ghost now. Like Miles, like what do they look like as hatchlings? And he's like, you just gotta start hatching them out and figuring it out, and that's how it is with a lot of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, we decided we were ready to take that leap, and because like you said, I don't know, is it nervousness of IDing something wrong, or that's kind of
Right.
what held me back on it for a while, but now we're to the point where it's like I'm fairly confident, and I know I can talk to you and Miles and Gary, and we got the whole crew up here that I trust. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see what pops out of them, but hopefully I'll have her handled.
Nice, nice. So in terms of like your breeding operation and like how you got started, do you feel like the trajectory that you kind of started off with in terms of like knowing what size you wanted to be at as a breeder, like do you feel like that stayed on course and stayed on plan, or do you feel like you kind of deviated from that plan a little bit and as you went on with breeding, you started figuring out different things and kind of changed your trajectory and what you're doing, or how would you say that you kind of done that as you were starting and then kind of how you are right now in your breeding projects?
Yeah. So when we first started, I really didn't look at it as, I mean, more than, I think it'd be cool to kind of reproduce some leopard geckos and,
Right.
just more like a fun little thing to do. And I feel like a lot of people start out that way, and not that it's necessarily a bad thing. But the geckos that we started breeding with, like, they're not breeder quality geckos, right? So as far as like pivoting, I'd say we did more than a pivot, whole 360-degree, you know,
Yeah.
turnaround of what we started with. Um, and then once we started, really realizing what is all into breeding and all the different genetics and stuff like that, um, I'd say we've stayed pretty on par with what we've expected. We've slowly grown and upped our numbers little by little the last 5 years, which has been pretty much what I expected as well. Um, Now, as far as like the Albey stuff and working with that, um, yeah, it wasn't really like when we started or when I got this new plan together that's what I had my eye on. It was more or less, I trusted Miles. We worked with, or I purchased a lot of our founding stock off of him, I should say, and I saw him posting about these Albey snow leopard geckos, and I just immediately fell in love. Immediately it was just something about them, and so that wasn't really part of the original plan, but I think it was a pretty good addition to the original plan. But yeah, I don't know. I think as far as where we started, where we've come from, yeah, we've made quite a few leaps and bounds.
Yeah, as you should, right? You shouldn't be at the same place. You should where you started off with your first pairings or whatever. So
Yeah, and like the way that we started, like we started with fish, and we were at the pet store and saw somebody had a bearded dragon, right? So then we went home and did our research, and we get a bearded dragon, and a couple months later we got a leopard gecko, and then you start thinking it's like, well, yeah, maybe it'd be fun to breed them, right? And I think a lot of people start off that way,
mhm.
and like for us, it was more or less like I think we did a lot of the right research just in the wrong places, right?
Okay.
And then once we start getting deeper into it and you start talking to this breeder and that breeder and people that know actually what they're doing, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, we're not really doing things
Yeah.
right. And instead of getting discouraged and kind of just giving up on it, it's like, well, no, like I enjoy doing it. Now let's just make sure we do it correctly, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, as far as like I said, I feel like a lot of people get started kind of doing it that way, or maybe not the way that you should start. So I don't know. I'm kind of rambling here, but
No, yeah, that's why we have like platforms like this, obviously, to help out people that want to get, more breeding advice and want to hear from respected breeders who have good ethics, good morals about what they're doing, especially when it comes to leopard gecko breeding. And I remember like getting into it, and it's just like so daunting looking at that list of genetics and saying, okay, like what's the difference between like line bred and then like a genetic morph and then like there's combinations and then all the trade names, and it's like super crazy. And that's just the morph side of things. That's not even talking about like care and supplements and stuff like that.
right.
And I feel like people could get so overwhelmed, and it's like, where do I go to get good information from that's trusted and can be, reliable every time?
Well, that's the thing too. Like, at least when I first started, it was, you don't want to feel like a bother, right? To somebody
Yeah.
that knows what they're doing. So like to sit there and like message somebody every day, like I did not want to do that,
Yeah. You
and
don't want to be that
if
guy.
yeah, but like, if somebody does that, like if somebody messages me now, right, asking for questions or advice or whatever, it's like absolutely not a problem. I have no
Right.
issue answering questions. But when I first started out, I don't want to be that guy, right? And
Yeah.
it's like not that it's necessarily a bad thing, because if I would have just asked all the right questions to the right people right away, it would have saved like like when I say we started in 2017, we started that's when we started like doing it properly, right? Prior to
Yeah.
that, I don't really count as like breeding experience. But in the time prior to that, if we would have asked the questions and been the annoying new guy, right, that is asking all the dumb questions, but it would have just saved some time and maybe a little bit of a headache and like, oh yeah, we did this all wrong, and but so for anybody out there that might feel that way, like definitely don't hesitate to reach out to. Yeah, I'd say 90% of breeders won't have a problem with you reaching out to ask questions, because that's just,
Right.
if without being told or without doing, having the knowledge, how can you know, right? And if you don't know,
Exactly.
then you just don't know. So,
Yeah.
yeah, don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions is probably what I would say.
Yeah. So what are some of the like right questions, I guess, to ask if people are looking for direction and want to see, how could I take my breeding to the next level, or how could I get, more breeding experience, or how do I know what morphs to get into and stuff like that? What are some of those questions that you wish you would have asked and got insight in when you were first getting started?
Um, yeah, that's a tough one. That is a tough one. So as far as questions, that I would tell somebody to ask, like it's pretty tough because it just depends, without knowing a base knowledge of what somebody has, right? Like you
Right.
probably shouldn't be asking like, what do I feed a leopard gecko, right?
Yeah.
Or what temperature do I need to keep, the eggs at or the hatchlings at
Yeah.
or what? Like that's probably not stuff that you should be reaching out to ask, right? That's stuff that is pretty readily out there available in just a
Quick
couple
Google
minutes of
search.
looking. Exactly.
Yeah.
But like as far as like the questions to reach out and ask would be like anything that when it comes to genetics and like what is ethic as far as genetics is a big one. And even sometimes depending who you ask, you'll get different answers, right?
Yeah.
So that's but that's a big one. And so what I always tell everybody, like when I'm at shows too, is I'll tell them at a show, like you go to every leopard gecko person in this room and you ask them whatever the question is, you'll probably get that many different answers, right? And that's like with a lot of things. So what I tell people is ask as many people as you can, as many respected breeders, as many people that you have at your local show, whatever you can, and get their answer and put it all together and then see what makes more sense. If you get 9 out of 10 saying doing it this way, well, that's probably the way to do. If something's 50-50, well, you got to, then put that all together and think back and think what you think is right? Because some of the stuff, it really is 50-50, right? Like, loose substrate or no loose substrate. Like, I'm not going in on that subject, but that's just an example. So when it comes to stuff like that, I always tell people, ask 100 people and kind of compile their answers and go from there. And, that'll help you out a lot, instead of just, sitting back and trying to figure it out on your own. Just don't be afraid to ask questions like that. And don't be afraid to ask multiple people.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like that's where you find a lot of that stuff. Especially, it's always the small things that people always get stuck on, like, oh, what vitamin should I use? Like, there's definitely vitamins not to use that you should, like, completely stay away from. But then there's that, depending on, I'm sure, like, even the people you talk to, like, not every breeder is going to do things the exact same way. And that's, I guess, the cool part of it as well, where you could get creative into trying new things and doing new things that's slightly different from someone else, but you're still getting the same cool results. Obviously, health should be above everything. And especially when we talk about genetics, there's some things that you should completely stay away from. But then there's that, that other thing, that other, like, I guess, gray area where you could, find things out and leave for creativity, and just talking to people, I think, is the best thing to go about certain things.
Exactly. And, the more you talk to people, the more you learn, the better what you're producing is going to be. And, just, it's not a bad thing. Nothing in that is bad.
Right.
But yeah, just don't reach out to, people asking what leopard geckos eat, because that's too cool. But
right, exactly. Hopefully you know what you're doing. Especially if you're listening to this podcast, you should know what geckos should be eating by now.
I've actually told people, though, like, you should know how to care for an animal before you even try to figure out how to breed it, right? Like, that's pretty basic. But I mean, you'd be surprised, man. Sometimes, people try to run before they can even crawl, and that don't end up too well.
Exactly. No, and that's what's so cool about, like, talking to people, especially if you're getting geckos from reputable people and then you're talking to them and having conversations. Those people, well, you spend money with them, so hopefully they're willing to talk with you. If not, then shouldn't have got a gecko from them. But just talking to those people, like, I know you bought from Miles early on when you were getting started, and having that's a great resource to go and ask questions. And he's just such a library of great information. And talking with Gary, who's another amazing guy in Wisconsin who's breeding and has so many amazing just stories and so much information about the background behind morphs, because he's been breeding for so long. So making those connections that way is another great way to go about it.
Yeah, as far as that goes, and I mean, obviously there's many great breeders all over the country. But I think, like, I kind of lucked out with who geographically is closer to me, right? But as far as, like, just because somebody lives close to you doesn't mean that you're going to be friends, right? But
true.
I can legitimately call Miles
they're good breeders too.
Friends, right? What was that?
Yeah. Or they might not be good breeders too.
Right. Like, you could have a Joe Schmo who's just terrible living, right down the block. But as far as, like, Gary and Miles, really, for sure lucked out with having people like that I can lean on. Oh, Heidi, don't let me forget Heidi. I'll actually be seeing Heidi in like 2 weeks here, so we'll be at a show together. So
nice.
I talked to Heidi, gosh, at Sewerfest. Every Sewerfest, we'll sit there for probably an hour after everybody has started packing up, just talking, right? Like, she's definitely a wealth of knowledge as well.
Amazing, yeah, and that's what's so cool about shows, and even cool that you're doing the shows too. Like, I don't even know how did that get started? Like, you wanting to do shows in Wisconsin, and getting that started.
So when we first decided to start a reptile show, basically, so we live in northern Wisconsin. We're like 30 minutes north of Green Bay, and the closest reptile show to us was Sewerfest, and that's in by Racine. So, like, almost 3 hours south of us, just under 3 hours south of us. So for us, it was more or less we started one in Green Bay to give us a reptile show that was closer to home, right? That's kind of where our mind was when we started. And
Yeah.
then, I mean, our first show went really, really well. So then, we did another one, and then we did, I think what was it? Yeah, so March 2020 would have been our second show, and that was the weekend before everything shut down with COVID.
Dang, that's
So
crazy.
yeah, everything. So our second show in, everything, comes to a screeching halt. Like, we all know, we all stayed locked in and stuff.
Yeah.
So we waited. I think our third show was August of 2020. And it was
Okay.
very small. I mean, very, very small. We had a handful of tables and we had them all spread out. And the turnout was small, obviously, because stuff was still kind of crazy at that point. And then that pushes us into 2021, where we decided to add another location. And that's about an hour and a half west of Green Bay. So that was May of 2021. We started Rothschild. It's out by Wausau, Wisconsin. And
Hmm.
then from there, it was kind of like, you know, let's just put our foot to the floor, right? And we went from
Yeah.
having, is that 5 Expos at that point to we had one in August, September, October, November, and
You
December of
added Fond du Lac
2021.
too?
Added Fond du Lac. And then now this year we have 11 shows on the schedule. So the only month we didn't have a show is March, and that's spread over 3 locations. And yeah, so far it's every show we have it's growing. We keep getting more vendors and more variety. Like I couldn't have asked for it to turn out better than it has. Knock on wood,
Right.
obviously.
Yeah, exactly. No, but that's crazy. Like starting from like 2019, and then even like thinking about 2020 being the COVID year, where
Yeah,
like
yeah.
things were on halt, and like you're still growing. That's just a testament to like your hard work and everything that you're doing on the passion side of things. But then also seeing like I think a lot of people talk about the reptile hobby sometimes like being at a halt or being dead, but like there's still so much more growth to be done in so many other places where there's not even a lot of shows like you were mentioning.
Exactly. So like that's the thing. Like so Green Bay had a pretty good reptile community and like
Right.
prior to when we put a show there. But Green Bay is I mean, as far as Wisconsin standards, it's decent sized area. Um, so all right, sorry about that. So Green Bay is a pretty decent sized area, but when we put our show in Wausau area, I don't think they don't have like reptiles in a pet store. They might have a Petco with like leopard geckos and stuff, but it's not
Okay.
really too much of a thing. So we've been there 5 times now, and every time I'd say probably half the people through the door, it's their first time there. They've never even considered anything other than a dog or a cat as a pet. And
Wow.
doing these shows really has opened my eyes to like the amount of people that don't even know a snake or a lizard could be a pet is just mind blowing to me. Like
Wow.
if you take any given show just for that area, you're probably only bringing in less than 1% or 1% of the population anyway, right?
Yeah.
And then out of that group of people, if 50% never thought or 40% never thought to have a reptile, it's like think of how many people in any given city just not only take the people that hate reptiles out of the equation, right? Like you're probably not going to
Right.
turn those, but just the amount of people that have never considered a reptile as a pet, it's
It's crazy.
astonishing. It's like the reptile hobby is far from dead or far from over as long as we can keep getting, connecting with those people, right? So if everybody
Right.
does their part to connect with those people, we got nothing to worry about.
Yeah. And even like seeing people at shows who are I feel like something that's really interesting about, especially shows that I've noticed in the Midwest, is how much of the family dynamic it is there. And then, like even like you guys kind of, I remember our first show in Janesville, and then you guys were super welcoming and not competitive at all. Just hanging out, talking geckos, which is super awesome. But then also seeing kind of the people that come in, it's a lot of like people who are really interested into reptiles, or like a lot of people have done their research and know what they want, or even a lot of families coming in and willing to spend a lot more money on like a pet gecko than a lot of other places, which I think is also super cool geographically. It's just about the people who come into shows and are interested into shows in this area, which is super cool.
Yeah, the most I've ever traveled for a reptile show is about 4 hours from northeast Wisconsin. So that gets you just into Minnesota or just into Illinois, right? And so I can't attest to any other part of the country, but I've heard stories. Like Gary used to live in Ohio, and he said, yeah, just I don't know if he talked about it in his episode, but stuff's different, right, from what he says. And you've done shows out in California, and I'm sure stuff's different. But I can only attest to what I know, which is Wisconsin, basically, as far as the reptile shows go. And I don't think I'd trade, not only our diehard reptile community, but even the people that are just kind of, just barely interested. I wouldn't trade that for any other part of the country. I don't think, just because, like you said, for the most part, there's outliers, but everybody is so friendly and welcoming, right? Like that's the biggest thing that sticks out in my head is everybody is so friendly and so welcoming to the newcomer, to the outsiders, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's just something that sets, I think shows that have been here just apart for so many other shows, and getting started with the show, I could imagine just like planning and everything like that for shows and getting a venue and stuff like that, getting people set up. Like, I think just as a vendor, I get to see just how much a show promoter puts into the show. So you, like, being a vendor of a show and then now being on the opposite side of being a show promoter, and you're creating shows and setting them up, what has been like the biggest thing that you like would have never thought being a show promoter, or something that's like astonishing in terms of planning and stuff like that you had to kind of overcome when you were getting this stuff started?
So there's a lot that I definitely wouldn't have expected, right? And I would say that being a vendor first definitely helped being a show promoter side, right?
Right.
Just because, we've done a number of shows prior to ever doing our own show. And it's like, okay, like some stuff is good, some stuff is not so good, some stuff you prefer this way or that way. So I think that really kind of helped as far as like our initial planning moving forward. But the biggest thing I could probably say is after doing our own shows is it gives you a much higher appreciation for every other show promoter out there. Like, obviously there's some not so good reptile shows, right? But most reptile shows are pretty good, and especially all the reptile shows in our area. We got Sewer Fest, we got the Show Me Snakes show. Like, it gives you a much higher appreciation for those guys, just because you know what all goes into doing a reptile show, right? Like, it's not just like you set up the location and then people show up. Like, I wish it happened like that. But it's just
not how it works.
No, not at all. So that's probably my biggest takeaway is just like, how much I appreciate those guys that much more. Like, Sewerfest has been going on, for people that don't know, longer than Tinley Park. I think they started the same year, but Sewerfest was prior to them. Don't quote me on that, but I know for sure they've been going on longer than NARBC.
Wow.
And that's Wisconsin's like show, like that's the OG show in Wisconsin. So to have somebody like that, and obviously Shane, who runs it, is highly respected anyway, but it just gives it extra little edge of respect now, rather than if I'd have never had a show and just vended. I just have a little bit more respect now after doing our own show, right?
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's crazy. And even just, there's so many like small things like marketing that you have to like get ready for, especially starting up a new show. Like, I could imagine just like the pressure, like, is anybody going to show up to this thing? Like, how is this going to turn out? Our vendor's going to be happy. So I could just imagine just like how much like blood, sweat, tears you put into this, like setting up the Facebook and social media pages and getting vendors on board in the first place, saying like, hey, like, put your trust in us to come to this show.
Yeah.
It's definitely paid off from what I've seen.
Yeah. So that's a big one, right? Like, as a vendor, I don't know how far you've traveled to vend shows, right? But for us, like 4 hours is kind of our cutoff, right? But to convince somebody to, load up all their animals, load up their car, get in the car at 4 a.m. and drive 4 hours to go vend a show that they just heard of, like, that's kind of a tough bargain, right?
Right.
So, like, especially starting out, our shows were considerably smaller. But now, a couple years in, like, like you said, like we're starting to actually see kind of the fruits of our labor for the first couple of years, and it's nice to really be seeing that pay off.
Nice. So where do you see? I don't know. Like, what's the future heading for this? Like you have this so pretty much established in Wisconsin. You have more locations. You're growing. So where do you see it going in the future? Years from now.
Yeah. Well, I can say I don't plan on going anywhere, right? Like I always plan on doing the reptile shows. As far as growing anymore, there's nothing in our immediate plans to continue growing. I really like our Wisconsin, our three locations that we have are they're doing well, right? And there's not much I would like to change about them, but I don't want to take my focus off of them yet, if that makes sense. I don't
Yeah.
want I don't want anything to fall through the cracks. I don't want to take a step backwards anywhere. So my goal for the immediate future is just kind of keep pressing forward and moving forward on these three locations. And, because with as much growth as we've experienced, I mean, we can easily double where we're at now as far as, what we're doing at those locations.
Right.
So, but that's not going to come by itself. That's stuff that you kind of have to put time and work into. So I'd rather put the time and work into those locations currently than kind of spread myself out and have to do, those locations plus worry about another one or two, right?
Right. Exactly. Especially when you're seeing these ones doing so well. Like, I feel like a lot of people could get into doing shows and wanting to have shows in their area and start one up, and then they get so overwhelmed with just the work of trying to do shows every month, or they're doing it in multiple locations in different times of the year and the same month and things like that. And then they need help with planning and stuff like that, and then they try to outsource, and then people drop the ball in certain places. And I feel like when you grow too fast, that's when you see a lot of issues. And I feel like you're growing at like the perfect rate, and then also like you're focused on these shows. It's super awesome to see that you're not trying to go too far ahead where it could be bad and all of a sudden these shows could just disappear.
Yeah, that is definitely the last thing I want to happen. I was telling somebody like 15 years, right? Like that's a long time, and obviously a lot of things can happen between then and now. Like
Right.
this is what I want to be doing in 15 years. Like I don't foresee myself wanting to do anything different. Like and you take like the breeding side of things and then the show side of things. Like yes, they're both reptile industry related, but they're totally opposite. But
Right.
like I literally can't see myself not doing either one, right?
Yeah.
Like the day to day from breeding and the day to day from like running the expos, two totally different job descriptions, two totally different whatever.
Yeah.
But like it just so happens that like I really find myself enjoying both, right?
Right.
So it's kind of funny how that worked out, but it worked out rather well. It would kind of suck if I didn't like doing it, right? And if I didn't like
Right.
doing it,
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it. And that's probably for anybody with anything. But it's nice that I enjoy it this much, right? It just makes it a
Exactly.
little bit easier to keep pushing forward.
Yeah. And I feel like the way you even started off with like wanting to fill a need, like that's something super cool where you saw a need in your area within like, the Green Bay area and wanting to add a show there. Gary's already up there, which is super cool too, to have, prominent breeders already, wanting to get involved in that kind of thing. And then also seeing, that's kind of how the podcast started, where there was a need for kind of like, some type of educational thing to be up with, leopard geckos and stuff like that, and seeing kind of that kind of same relationship where you're filling a need and, adding people that want to get involved somehow to create something new. So super admire that about you, because I know that's definitely a lot of hard work to get started.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and you bring up a valid point with the podcast too. Like, so you totally understand how like it's not like you sit back with like this business plan and like, okay, I'm going to do this because this could be a very valuable business, right? It's like you're
Right.
kind of sitting back and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this because like first of all, there's a need for it, and second of all, like you have a genuine passion for it, right? So
Yeah.
when you have a genuine passion for something, it's like you don't even really think about all the other, BS, background crap when you're in it doing it because you're just enjoying it so much.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's something that could totally get fogged up in the behind the scenes and stuff happening, and especially within leopard geckos, we see the drama, we talk about it all the time, everything
Yeah,
that's happening. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
cool. It's cool to have that passion and stay focused on that, because if not, it could just get foggy.
yeah. And then stuff like that, like you're saying with the leopard gecko stuff, or like like the boring business side of things at the expo, like this the stuff that is sometimes necessary is like the stuff that is just like if you could take a chunk of right of the breeding or of the expo and just do away with it, like it'd be like the boring business stuff or the drama or like the
Right.
like fighting and carrying on over like ethics and genetics and stuff like that. Like I could do without all that, but like sometimes that stuff is just necessary, right? So it's kind of funny
Exactly.
how like the most draining stuff is kind of the most necessary stuff sometimes, but
Right.
when you get that stuff out of the way, then you can just enjoy, what it is you enjoy about what you're doing, which is nice.
Right, exactly. Before the show, we were talking about hatchlings and how, and even that we were talking about albies and stuff like that, and just like seeing that, like we can relate on that. Like we both, it's like every time you walk past the incubator, you're like, "Hey, what's new? What hatched out?"
Yeah,
So it's cool to like always, still have that passion, obviously, to see what's new. And in leopard geckos, there's always something new coming out. So
yeah, and like if you did lose that passion, right? Like, and some people do, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. But like, if you don't have a passion for something, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Like,
right,
that's the way I look at it. I mean, even if you're making buku bucks doing something, like if you don't have a passion for it, what's the point? What's the point other than just to make money? Well, if you're just doing something just to make money, let's take a couple steps back and kind of reevaluate what we're doing here, right?
right.
So yeah, like you said with the passion, and you every time you pass the incubator, you're peeking in on them, or every time you walk into your leopard gecko room, you're opening hatchling tubs to see how they're doing and stuff like that. Like if you don't have that kind of passion, then it's kind of pointless, in my opinion.
Yeah. So other than that, we talked about that stuff, kind of the stuff you're working with. Is there anything new and exciting that that's been piquing your eye lately, or stuff within leopard geckos within the community that you're really excited to be a part of, or you're just seeing, new people getting in that's getting you excited, or anything like that that's kind of been, I guess, revamping that passion, just because there's so much that could definitely lower that. So I
Yeah,
guess staying on the
yeah.
positive side of things.
So as far as like the leopard gecko stuff, and obviously there's a lot of hype around Cypher, but I've been kind of kicking that around. I think I'm gonna jump into the Cypher stuff, which that's another thing. Like it's a blank slate, and you can do pretty much anything with it, right? So
Right.
that's very exciting as well. Um, as far as newer breeders that are kind of coming into the scene, Leo 130 Exotics. He's a pretty good friend of mine. He's up and coming. I think this is his second season officially hatching stuff out. But he's a cool dude. He's got some nice stuff going on as well. And then as far as what's new at the reptile show, um, there's a lot of new stuff in the works. There's a lot of new, we're always coming up with ideas, and sometimes it just takes some time to implement. But
Right.
um, yeah, there's a lot I can't really. It's not 100%, so I can't say, but there's a lot
Okay.
up and coming for the Reptile Expo that I'm really
Nice.
excited about. So
Yeah, we got to get the strength in Leo's priority on that
for
special
sure,
look.
for sure, yeah, 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 man. If you'd have caught me like in like a month, I might have a couple more answers for you.
Ooh,
Um,
okay.
but yeah, we got some cool stuff rolling out with the Reptile Expo that um, you talk about stuff that gets you up in the morning. That's stuff that like I'm so excited about. It's hard to sleep, right? Like
Right.
yeah, yeah. It's just like a whole
Yeah.
new level of excitement.
Yeah. Oh man, I feel that. There's like some, like when you think back to like certain things that happen, or like certain things you're like wanting to hit, like I'm sure when you hit like your first Albie, you were like just over the
Yeah.
moon and stuff like that. It's like those things that it's like so stressful. Like you might spend like an hour looking at like a new hatchling that hatched out, and you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah,
It's another gecko, but it's like
just watching it.
those geeky things that get you up and keep you excited.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, it's always the passion, and it's hard to always keep focused on that also, just with so much that's going on with geckos, and you see that obviously there's drama involved, but getting gecko centered, I think, is something that's really important and something that I've definitely seen you be. It's like you're so focused on everything that's in front of you and kind of having your plans and your goals and ambitions. And you've been able to implement that just by being focused on that, which is super awesome too.
Yeah, I think one thing that does kind of help that is I'm not too terribly involved on Facebook. I see most of the stuff that goes on. I just choose not to partake in
Right.
most of the stuff that goes on, right? And there's a lot of good on Facebook, don't get me wrong, which I don't partake in. And there's a lot of negative crap on Facebook, which I just don't partake in either, right? And to me, it's kind of a dual-edged sword. Like, you put yourself out there on Facebook more, you get more followers, and you get more followers, yada, yada, the list goes on.
Yeah.
Um, but, like, the other edge of that sword is, like, you don't put yourself out there on Facebook and you don't get into it. Like, life is a lot more peaceful that way, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and so I'm trying to get more active on Facebook and trying to, get out there more. But, yeah, it's kind of nice being as drama free as possible sometimes.
Yeah. And I feel like that's something that's super tangible to hold on to, especially as people are getting into the hobby. I feel like it's so easy to be kind of lazy eyed with everything, and you don't get to see certain things. So when you get into it and you're seeing things, once you're just into the geckos, it's the best part about it. And then once people get kind of unfocused, then things kind of change around.
Yeah, when fighting over stuff becomes more important than the actual gecko itself, then that's kind of when stuff kind of went a little haywire, in my opinion.
So, along with some things that you're looking forward to see in the hobby, I know that you've been in the hobby for a while now. You're pretty established as a breeder, and what you're breeding, pretty much. So, what are some things that you're looking forward to in terms of combinations? I know we talked a lot about projects and just growth of reptiles in the community. So, anything else that you're looking forward to seeing growth in, or just things that just excites you in the hobby that you've been looking out for?
Yeah, well, the getting albinos into Albey Snow, which I pretty sure, if I remember our past conversations correctly, you got a pretty good start on. So I'm excited to see that stuff. And basically, like we were talking earlier with the Albie Snow, the Cipher, the stuff like that is just seeing the different. You could pretty much put anything into it, right? Like, obviously not the eye trades with Cipher, but you get what I'm saying. Like, it's basically a blank slate, and just kind of, I'm excited to see what people do with it, and what new combinations and morphs come out of it.
Nice. And in terms of trajectory of the hobby that you've seen kind of the nature of the hobby and how it goes. Do you think the hobby is going to be in a positive direction? Do you think it's going into a positive direction now, or how have you seen the hobby been in the past year or so, and where do you think it's going?
I think overall it's an upward trajectory. If you look at any graph, there's ups and downs, and of course, like with anything in life. But I mean, I think overall the hobby's growing. I think for every bad person that gets in the hobby, there's two good people getting in. I pretty firmly believe that. And like we were talking about earlier, like, if somebody doesn't know something, they don't know something. So if they're doing something wrong, it's not necessarily because they're a bad person or they don't care. They might just not know, right? So, I feel like our part is to kind of educate people, and it's kind of on us to keep the hobby moving in a positive direction. If we want to sit here and shut out all the people that are making mistakes, and kind of get them out of the hobby without giving them a chance to fix the mistake, I guess, then of course that's going to stifle the growth because you're just pushing people out.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's just I totally agree with what you said. You talked about just our responsibility as breeders to bring people in, not shut people out, whether that's online or at shows, and even having a great combination of both. That's super important.
Yeah, rather, yeah, if you're just shutting people out, and don't get me wrong, like, you can sit there and have a conversation with somebody 100 times and they still won't listen. Well, all right, you did your, you tried, you did your part, just not working. But, if somebody asks a question or is doing something that's a little bit, you know, not the way it should be done, you can't just shut that person out right away. You got to at least give them a chance and try educating them. And if you try educating them and they don't want to be educated, well, you know, then you shut them out. But I'd venture to say most people aren't that way. Most people do want to do it the right way. They just don't know what the right way is.
I'm 100% with you. Yeah, especially in the hobby today. We see how it goes, but it's great that you have that nice perspective and that fresh perspective that not everybody who comes in is bad or wants to come at it bad, but people really do want to learn and are interested.
Yeah, as long as like we were talking about earlier, they're not asking, what do leopard geckos eat. Well, at that point, you might not be able to help them too much, but
Exactly. Hopefully geckos aren't on a kale diet at home.
yeah. Oh man, I've seen people argue.
That's man, even just thinking about that, that's just a headache.
You try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and it's like, all right, you thought, but we're trying to educate you, and no, they sat there and they argued that leopard geckos need fruits and vegetables. It's like that's the perfect example of somebody that you just aren't going to be able to help. But I will maintain that is, in my opinion, that is not most people. Most people will take kindly to, as long as you're not, for lack of better terms, an asshole when you're explaining to them, what they're doing wrong. If you kind of put it blissfully, most people will take that and kind of hold on to it and do the proper thing.
Exactly. And if you're listening to the podcast, you're in the right place. So
Exactly. Yeah, there's quite a few in the backlog that people can go listen to and get some knowledge. I know you got some cool stuff coming up too. So
definitely. Yeah. Well, Dylan, I appreciate you for spending your time here on the podcast today. Super grateful to have you on and just, talk shop, talk geckos. And it's a great time. Can't wait for the next show and we can do it in person. So it's a lot of fun.
yeah. No, I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, in person that'd be fun. So as soon as you get that rolling, let me know.
And that's all I have for you guys today on this episode of the podcast. I super appreciate Dylan for him using his time to come onto the podcast today and just having a great time and just letting us know a little bit more about him and his operation, just some of the things that he does for just so many people in the reptile hobby. So make sure to check out DAB Exotics on Instagram and Facebook, and then also the Scaled Up Reptile Expos. Make sure to check both of those out as well. Dylan is actually a new sponsor of the podcast, so great to have him on. I wanted to have him on even before he was a sponsor, but it just happened to work out well right now where he had him on as he became a sponsor, and then just as this new season came around, we had him on, and then he became a sponsor of the podcast. So super appreciate him and just his support in that regard as well. My one big thing for this episode, if you guys don't know, at the end of each and every episode, I do my one big thing. And one thing I've really noticed about Dylan is just how excited he is to bring people into the hobby. He's super fired up and pumped up about education when it comes to leopard geckos. We kind of just talked about Albey Snows today, which is one big thing that people are still confused on, regardless of what's already been out there in terms of information that even we've had on the podcast and stuff that's been on the internet and Facebook and all of the great places where we could get information about leopard geckos. People are still, either they don't know about it or they're super confused about how it works, and especially when we talk about the dominant gene and then the line-bred snow version of, when it comes to Albies. So super appreciate Dylan for coming on for that, and I'm just super grateful to just hear his insight about what it takes to bring more people into the hobby with his reptile shows, and then also when he goes and vends other people's shows, he's also super pumped up about education and getting more information about leopard geckos so we can get people into the hobby. And without that, the hobby is going to eventually die. So super important to have that. So that's going to be my one big thing for this episode of the podcast. I want to thank everyone for joining us on yet another episode of the Strength in Leos podcast. Don't forget to share with a friend, rate our podcast, and subscribe. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Strength in Leos. And last but not least, tune in next time for our next episode on Spotify, iTunes, Google Music, and our website, strengthinleos.com. This is your host, Evan Woldridge, signing off. Continue to grow in knowledge and share the strength in Leos.